Guys, welcome back to another video, and in this video we're going to be continuing on with our core data tutorial series. And in this particular tutorial, we are going to be taking a look at how we can constrain our core data entities. Now, when we talk about constraints, we're typically, most of the time, referring to uniqueness constraints, and that's what we're going to work with today. Now, what is a uniqueness constraint? Well, a uniqueness constraint is pretty much a way for us to say, hey, this attribute or these attributes, one or many attributes, has to be unique. Now, this is especially important for, let's say you have an address book application where you store contacts and information about those contacts. Well, maybe you store the email of someone, and you don't want there to be multiple contacts with the same email address. Or maybe you want to make sure that, if your contact has an ID, you want to make sure that there isn't the same ID or something like that. Well, that is where uniqueness constraints come in. In this example here in this video, what we're going to do is we are going to set a uniqueness constraint on the email attribute of a contact entity. Now, I have gotten rid of our project and task item entities because we're not going to use them in this particular example. So let's go ahead and get started. How do we add a uniqueness constraint? Because as you can see right here, we have first name, last name, suffix, prefix, email, phone number, ID, that sort of stuff. But we want to add a uniqueness constraint on the email attribute. So the way we do that is inside of our data model inspector. You can see we have a table here that is labeled uniqueness or unique constraints. Right? So let's go ahead and go into Xcode here. If I go into the inspector and go into the entity section here, and we want uniqueness constraints. Go ahead and hit the plus button. And then what we have here now is a field. We have a row where we have to put a comma separated list of all the attributes that must be unique. Now, I'm just going to put email in there. Now, core data will enforce a uniqueness constraint at the time of saving for the email attribute of our contact entity. Now, note what I said there. They are not enforced before you save, but when you save, then they are enforced. Now, this is particularly useful if you want to display an error to the user saying, hey, something went wrong. You can't have a contact, you can't have more than one contact with the same email, because when your constraint here gets hit, your catch block, when you have your do catch that surrounds your save, that gets executed, because technically it's an error when trying to save. However, you can change things to where it silently resolves this conflict. And that's with a concept called a merge policy. So I want to go over merge policies real quick. Let's go ahead and go into our data controller here, where we're working in this video for our code, or at least the majority of our core data code. Let's go into our navigator, project navigator, and we want data controller. All right. So by default, in a Swift UI application in particular, we have a property set to true from our persistence .swift file that basically says, hey, automatically merge changes into the parent. But we don't want that. So get rid of that line like I have here. And then we're going to set the merge policy property on our view context. And we can do that by saying container.viewContext.merge policy. Now, one thing I do want to bring up here is that you should do this after you load your persistent stores. So once you have successfully loaded your persistent stores, put this line after that. And we'll set this equal to ns merge policy dot. Now let's go ahead and go over these merge policies here, because there are a couple that we can work with. The first one here is merge by property object trump. Now, what does this merge policy mean? Well, what this means is that any data that you have in memory when you save will be used instead of the data that's already saved. So if you have a conflict between the data that you're trying to save and the data that already exists, it'll prefer and it will use the data in memory rather than the data that's in the data store already. We have error. So ns merge policy error. What does this do? Well, this is the default merge policy that we have. This basically says, hey, if there's a merge conflict, if there's some kind of conflict with the data that's in our core data store and the stuff that's in memory that hasn't been saved yet, spit out some kind of error. So that catch block, when trying to execute that save statement with the try, that will get triggered when this happens. And in this case, this is what we're going to use here, but let's continue. Now, override. Override basically says always use the always override everything. Okay, everything. Every attribute value for a given object gets overridden by the stuff in memory. And there's really no exception to that rule here. Now, rollback. What does this merge policy do? Well, the ns merge policy rollback. This will essentially say, okay, always prefer. Well, let's back up. We talked about override, and rollback is the exact opposite of override. It says, hey, prefer every attribute value that's already in the database, already in the core data store, over the stuff in memory. Now, with override and rollback, you might think, well, wait a second. If we're talking like ns merge policy, merge by property object trump, for example, how is that different from override? Well, here's the thing. Merge by property object trump is property based. So this basically says, okay, if there's a conflict with a specific property, then prefer the property value that's in memory over the property value in the data store. Override says the entire object. Rollback says basically prefer the entire object in the database or the core data store instead of what's in memory. And then we have another policy. Merge by property store trump. Now, what is this? This is the last policy that we can use. What does this mean? Well, it's similar to rollback, except this is property based. So it says, hey, if there's a conflict between a given property in the data store and in memory, prefer what's in the data store over what's in memory. Okay? So that's what those 4 merge policies do. How you want your core data stack to handle merge conflicts like this is entirely up to you. It's up to how you want it to behave ultimately. These merge policies are especially important to know when you start getting into CloudKit integration, because of the nature of syncing between multiple devices. One device may make a change at the same time as something on another device, and you're going to need to, you're going to need to understand these merge policies, because if you don't, your application isn't going to know how the hell to handle all that data coming in and how to merge it all into something coherent. So here, in this example, we're going to use error. And inside of the content view for this application, what we have is a navigation stack with a list. And this list is going to show all of the contacts, right, in our core data store. And then there's a button in the toolbar for adding a new contact, which just adds contact information for John Doe. And it will add the same information every time. And then we try to save it. If we catch an error when saving, what we do is we print the localized description of the error, and then we also summon an alert to let the user know, hey, you can't do that. You have to have, you can't save a contact with this email address because one with that email address already exists. Okay? So let's go ahead and run our code and see what happens. Here we go. We've saved it. And we're running it. Okay, so here's our application. You can see we have Doe John. So because we have our first and last name there. Let's go ahead and add. And then when we try to do that, we get an error. We get that alert that shows up saying, "Hey, there's already a contact with that email address. You can't have multiple contacts with the same email." And we can just hit OK and be done with it. All right, so that pretty much does it for this video, guys, on how we can enforce uniqueness constraints in core data. Thank you all so very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.